Hey y'all, welcome back to the Power and Lifting Podcast. I'm your host, Solana Lewis. I'm excited, guys. If you are joining me on YouTube or podcast, either one, I'm excited to be here with y'all today. Wanted to just remind you guys that I am now on YouTube. I have about 8 episodes of the podcast up on YouTube. I'm going to be active on YouTube weekly. I'm committed to it finally, so I can give y'all another way of viewing the podcast for people who like visuals, and also a place for me to put other info that is longer form, just like podcasts, but again with visuals. So I'm excited about that. Make sure you subscribe if you're listening on a podcast. Make sure you subscribe for on YouTube. And thank you for being part of, I don't know what to call y'all, my peoples. Thank you for being my people. I appreciate all of you. Today's episode is about how to guarantee training PRs. Now, as powerlifters, or people who just love lifting heavy, even if you don't compete, I know y'all love PRs. That's why we're here, right? That's probably what interested you in listening to the podcast in the first place, either hearing about strong women in the powerlifting space or just learning more about powerlifting to, in the end, go on the platform and PR. So, let's get started. How do you guarantee PRs? If you guys follow me on Instagram, I very recently posted a squat PR. I hit a decent squat PR for a set of 4, was stoked about it. And I put in the caption, I planned out this PR 5 weeks ago, and I'm so happy that everything went according to plan so I could actually execute on what I planned on doing. And I had multiple people reach out to me and say, how did you plan out a PR? Like, we all love PRing, but how did you plan out this PR? Like, I would love to plan out a PR, and to understand how to plan out PRs or to even plan out your training numbers is huge for, number 1, motivation. Number 2 is huge because you have a vision. Like, you know, you're not just going to the gym to, like, you know, diddle bop around and lift some weights, but you know that you're pushing towards a specific PR. And so you know that you're there to put in serious work, and it's way more fun to train knowing that you're pushing toward a PR on a monthly basis than to only look forward to PRs on the platform. Because let's be real, we're all if you're competing somewhere between 1 to maybe max 5 times a year. I think 5 is too many, but some people do that. So, you know, you're probably competing 1 to 5 times a year. If you're like me, you're 2 to 3 times a year. That's like the sweet spot, in my opinion, for most people, including myself. And that's a long gap. If you're doing twice a year, that's a long gap to wait for a PR, to wait to be excited. You don't want to only be excited about your training, 2 months out of the year, because it's finally the month before you compete. So when I am planning out a PR, here's what I do. Now, the way that my coach programs for me and the way that I program for a majority of my clients is something called the wave method of training. Now, what's that mean? It essentially means that you are planning out a block, and that block can be anywhere from like 3 to 6 weeks typically. There's always exceptions. And each week you're pushing to increase the weight for however long that block is. So, example would be if I'm doing a 4-week training block, and let's say you're using RPE. You can do it with RPE, you can do it with percentage-based training, you can do a combination of both. If you're using RPE and you have a 4-week training block and you see that block 1 is like, okay, when it comes to your main squat, your primary squat day, you are hitting 1 set of 4 at an RPE of, let's say, 6, right? So not crazy heavy. RPE 6 is like pretty light. It means you have 4 more reps in the tank. If you don't know what RPE is, I have an episode on it, so go search, find how to use RPE episode, or it's called something like that, so you can understand what RPE means. But so if that is week 1 and you look at your program and you see that week 4 is you're trying to hit RPE 9 for a set of 3, and week 2 is RPE 7 and week 3 is RPE 8, then that's an example of using like the wave method of training. You're trying to increase the weight every week for a certain amount of time to to get your body used to feeling strongest on week 4 and to plan to push the numbers to the highest amount before you drop the load back down again over a 4-week time period. And just know I'm going to give some shout outs because I have some amazing mentors and I have I'm very blessed to be able to have so much information that I have access to. So if you guys want to learn more about this, I will say Steve Novi from PR's Performance and Marcellus Williams, the Swole Fester. Those are their names on Instagram and YouTube. They have a lot of content on this. So definitely check out their YouTube, check out their Instagrams. They give a lot of information on this. My coach, Brad Couliard, coaches both of them. So that's why what I say will sound similar to them because we're all kind of in the same coaching tree, right? So that's an example of the wave method. So if I know that that's how my block's going to go, then on week 1, I can decide, okay, what's an RPE 6 going to look like for me? I can estimate a number and I can plan to increase the load by maybe 5 kilos each week, for example, to push every week so that when week 4 comes along, that's the heaviest week I have. So in that scenario, you could essentially plan to PR on week 4. That's the heaviest that you're going. It's kind of that simple. Now, of course, when you're training, there can be weeks where you don't feel as strong or things can get in the way and you're not able to hit the exact number you want to hit. It can be multiple things. It could be you had an idea in your head that week 4 you'd be able to hit like a master PR and you're like, okay, this was too much of a reach for me. So you have to be, number 1, realistic, and number 2, you have to be willing to adjust. Like as the program is coming along, as you're training each week, you should be able to be like, okay, like I can't make this big of a jump each week, or last week, felt really good, but this week I feel super beat up for some reason. And I know I can't take as big of a jump as I wanted, so that may affect how heavy I go on this training session, which could affect how heavy you go for the next couple of training sessions over the training block. But overall, it's kind of as simple as if you're pushing for week 4 or whatever the last week of your program is to be your heaviest week, then you kind of work backwards from there and figure out how can I make small jumps each week to hit said goal number, which could potentially be a PR. So that's essentially how I planned out my PR. And I think one thing to note as well is that you have to realize, like, you may have to be someone who takes smaller jumps each week, but then potentially on the week that you're pushing the hardest, so in this same example, week 4, you may take a bigger jump on that week. Like, it depends on the human being. So, even though this concept sounds simple, if you're someone whose programming looks like this, where each week you're trying to push the intensity up, you have to learn your body, and you have to just be able to adjust the loads depending on how you feel. I've been powerlifting for 7 years, and I am at a good spot where I can actually use RPE very well for myself and pretty much be close to targeted RPE most of the time. It takes time to get RPE. It takes time to really understand how big your jumps can be week to week. It's really easy as a beginner powerlifter to think you'll have these massive PRs all the time because you're newer to the sport. So you're like, oh yeah, I PR all the time. That will slow down eventually, right? And also, you may be able to take really big jumps early on in your career as a powerlifter because you're simply new to it, so your body's adapting really fast. And let me tell you, as you keep training, it will slow down. So again, it's just about adapting to where you are right now in your powerlifting journey, making sure that you're on top of all of the variables that you can control, which is my next point. So in a scenario, in a perfect world, you would plan out your block, you will plan out your week 4 numbers, work backwards, plan out all your main numbers for primary days for your squat, your bench, and your deadlift. In a perfect world, you would hit it, right? Every single week. But if you have anything going on outside of the gym that is not on point, that can change things. So always just remember your sleep, the amount of sleep you're getting makes a difference. The amount of hydration you're getting, how your nutrition is overall will make a difference. Your energy level when you go to the gym will make a difference. How much stress you have going on outside the gym will make a difference, because if things are going on at home that's making life more difficult, or you're just in a bad place even mentally, that can affect your training too. So just keep in mind, you can plan out PR and potentially not hit it, and this does not mean you'll PR literally every single 4 weeks, because you might not. But what you can do is, instead of just looking at today's programming, look at the overall programming for the future as well. So if you're working with a coach, right, ask your coach if there's someone who happens to program weekly to get an idea of like what's the whole next block gonna look like, right? Or if you're someone who wants to plan it out, and you know, even if they program weekly, you know, like they're gonna use the same exercises and the same training block and just increase the load or change the numbers, then you can still plan out the PR and ask your coach, hey, are we going to try to push for like an RPE, RPE9 at the end of this block? Ask them so you can try to plan it out. And also, there are people who don't use the wave method of programming as well. So if you're someone who's not using this methodology of programming, then you will have to go a different way about planning out your PRs. But regardless, even if you're using the conjugate training method, and that's how your coach programs for you, where y'all be maxing out way more often than I would, you can still plan out your PRs, because at the end of the day, there's still going to be a system. Whoever your coach is, they should be, I hope to God, using some sort of system where they have an idea of when you're pushing harder and when you're pulling back. And it's going to be a pattern as well. No matter what your coach's coaching method is for you, there's some sort of pattern. It should not be randomized. If it's randomized, that's a serious problem. So you should still be able to plan out when you're going to push heaviest and how heavy you can go, and work backwards from there to see if you can push your PRs. Another big thing to note, this will be completely impossible to do if you're not tracking 100% of your training. I may sound like a broken record, but there are a lot of people who don't track all of their training. Meaning, like, you don't write down every number that you hit in training. So you should be writing down everything. You should be writing down everything. You should be recording your lifts so you can go back and look at them, study them, see, hey, I was supposed to hit this today. I hit it. Did it actually move as it should have? Was it too hard? Was it a good number for where I should have been today? And also, if you're not writing down all your numbers, then how can you possibly plan for anything, really? Like, everything is just random at that point. And that goes for accessories as well. I say this all the time, too. You should be tracking all of your accessories. Because, guys, guess what? You can use the same idea and use it for your accessories. Accessory PRs are awesome. It's not just about, powerlifting, platform, squat, bench, and deadlift. Like, PRing an incline bench press is fun. PRing on the leg press is fun. Like, everyone loves to push heavy weight on the leg press. I've never met anyone who's like, yeah, I don't really care about how many plates go on the leg press. People be loading that thing up and barely bending their knees just to show people how heavy they can go on the leg press. Please don't be that person. But, you can do the same thing for accessories. I love accessory PRs. I get so stoked about those. Personally, for me, I always pay attention to how much weight I'm pushing for a rear foot elevated split squat. I pay attention to dumbbell bench press. Like, I write down my numbers for every lift, but I get excited about things that are really similar to the competition lift, but not exactly the competition lift, and how heavy I can go with those. RDLs, I love PRing an RDL. Like, that is the best feeling, dumbbell or barbell RDL. So there's so many exercises you can use to try to push for PRs on. And if you just simply track all of your training, you can literally look at it week to week and say, okay, this is what I hit last week. Can I go 5 pounds heavier? Can I go 10 pounds heavier? Can I not go heavier at all? Is it deload week? Okay, then we're not going to go heavier. We're going to go lighter. And I think that's the main thing, too, is that when you're using, so I'm going to go back to my primary example that we were on, remember? So it was, we're planning out our squat, 4-week training block. We're going to take, in this example, I think I said 5 kilo jumps each week to try to PR on week 4, right? So let's say you finish out your training block, right? So you do the full 4 weeks. It's time for a new training block. And let's say in this example, you get the same exact exercises which should be pretty common. You shouldn't be switching your exercises all the time or every single month all the time, right? So let's say you get to the next training block and you have the exact same exercises. And maybe like your coach has taken your main squat, bench, and deadlift and they've adjusted the repetitions, but only slightly. It's like they plus or minus like 1 rep for the repetitions, right? You can then go and look at your past training block, see how the progression went, and then say, okay, even though we're starting a new training block, so obviously it's time to bring down the intensity, you can look at week 1 from the old training block and say, can I go very slightly heavier than I went on week 1 of last week's training block for this week 1? Does that make sense? So if on week 1, you hit, let's say, 60 kilos, and over the 4-week block, you progress by 5 kilos each week, and you hit 80 kilos, right? Can you start at 62.5 kilos for week 1 of the training block? It's still pulling back the intensity a lot because you just hit 80 kilos week before, but it's still going slightly heavier than you went on week 1. So you're still pushing up the intensity on week 1 a little bit, but it's still enough of a back off that it can be like your quote-unquote deload week still. I hope that made sense, but that's another thing that I personally do with my training. And if your coach is using the wave method of training or anything similar to it, even probably linear periodization this could potentially work for it as well. Just depending. But can you go slightly heavier on week 1 than you did last week 1? So you're still building intensity. You're still like watching the numbers go up, right? And you're still pushing yourself week to week, and you're still essentially PRing on at least from what you did last training block. And that's how you can ensure that you're hitting PRs. Like I always say, like I have said now, you have to listen to your body. You might not be able to hit the PR you aim for, and that can happen sometimes. That's okay. But if you're smart with the way that you are picking your numbers, and if you are paying attention to how the actual set feels, and you realize if you over or undershot, you make note of that so the next week you don't make the same mistake, you're going to be in a great position to set yourself up for more PRs than a person who's not doing this. If you're tracking everything you're doing, if you're tracking all your accessories, you can PR on your accessories too. Accessory PRs are fun. Any sort of PRs are fun. If we start paying more attention to overall PRs, the repetition PRs, the accessory PRs, then we're going to be more motivated to train hard. And it's going to be more fun because I know so many people who are like, Solana, how do you stay motivated? Like you said, your next meet is like next year, and it's only August of this year, so how do you stay motivated? And I stay motivated for many reasons. I love training. I just freaking love training right now. But also, I'm taking care of everything outside of the gym, too, to ensure that my training sessions are going as well as they possibly can within my power. I am planning out my blocks so I know that I'm pushing to hit a heavier number over whatever the time span is, so I can build towards that and know that I'm training for a purpose. I'm training very intentional. I'm not just winging it in the gym. I'm not like, oh, I forgot to write my numbers down, so the next week I come in and I do the same numbers as last week. I don't even realize I did that. I'm not paying enough attention. I'm not controlling what I can't control. Like, if you do these things, number one, even if you think this sounds really tedious, you'll get used to it super fast. You just have to be consistent with it. And what is more tedious? Always wondering if you did hit a PR, if you didn't track your stuff, and not ever knowing if you PR'd unless it's a single, and having no clue, like, if you're even improving in your training or if you are plateauing, etc. Or tracking everything and writing it down right after you do it in the gym, which only takes a few seconds after each set. And that could collectively take like 5 to 10 minutes in the whole training session at most, probably. And then you're able to know if you're PRing or not. You can feel really good about yourself. The things that take some time to do are typically the things that are going to make our lives more fun and easier. It's way easier to do that and to stay motivated than to not be motivated because you didn't take a few minutes in the gym to track everything. So that's really it, guys. That's how you can guarantee training PRs, and this puts you in a great position to PR on a platform. So it's a win-win. Seriously. Like, I think you'd all like that. So I appreciate y'all for listening to my episodes. If you are looking to improve your squat, to improve your deadlift, make sure you check the show notes to see my webinar for the squat and deadlift that give you specific tools to help you make sure your technique is on point so that you can ensure that you'll be platform ready on meet day, at least technique wise, that you ain't going to go out there and get red lights due to your technique. Technique also matters, right? If we have good technique, we can plan out those PRs, and good technique plus planning equals happy powerlifter. So check out the show notes, lots of stuff in there. I appreciate y'all for listening. Please make sure you subscribe to the podcast, subscribe to YouTube, leave a 5-star rating, leave a review if you're on Apple Podcasts, or leave a comment if you're on YouTube about what you like, what you didn't like, so I can improve, but make sure you're nice about it, please. All right, guys, catch you next time on the Power and Lifting Podcast.